I believe that the only real work of humans is care work. Nothing else matters. Everything else we've just sort of invented as a job. Right?
There's already a lot of parallels between your work and ours. This book, it meant a lot to me, how you define mothering.
It's keeping yourself and your people healthy and alive. Hard to have assign a financial value.
It completely changed the way that I show up as a parent.
And we all are called to do it. It's the really most shameful part of the United States. We tie basic human rights to having a job. Like, this concept of earning a living is such bullshit. We've never had a female in federal leadership. Our laws are made by white men. What we need are actual policies that reflect the realities of caregivers and families in the United States.
Beautiful. You just blew my mind.
There's so much more to money than saving it, spending it, and making it grow. So we're digging deeper and exploring all the topics we only scratched the surface on in our book to uncover how money really affects our lives. I'm Julien.
And I'm Kiersten, but most people know us as Rich and Regular. Maybe you've seen us on social media, read about us, or we popped up on your TV one day.
The Saunders are rewriting the rules to achieving financial freedom.
We're writers and creative entrepreneurs on a mission to inspire better conversations about money. Welcome to Cashing Out, the podcast. There are very few life milestones that define who you are to the outside world, like becoming a parent. But becoming a mom is a full identity in and of itself. The moment you bring a new life into this world, the expectation is that life becomes your life. And everything else you believed your life would amount to is put on hold. From romance to your personal interest and even your career, the culture we live in today expects moms to do it all. Some call mothering a full-time job. Others call it a purpose. Whatever you call it, our guest believes it's not enough to fully capture the breadth and burden of the role.
Please welcome Angela Garbes.
Meet Angela Garbes. She's the author of one of my favorite books, Essential Labor: Mothering as Social Change. Both NPR and The New Yorker named it one of the best books of 2022, and I couldn't agree more. Her words broke my brain, and they were a contributing factor to my reevaluating the kind of work that really matters.
Hi.
Hey, how's it going?
Good. How are you guys?
Good. Happy, what's today, Wednesday?
Yeah. Sounds right. Go with that.
We'll roll with it. Thanks for joining us and making the time for us. I'm going to start with a softball question because there's already a lot of parallels between your work and ours, but there's also some similarities between you and me. Like, first of all, we both love Crocs. And so my first question is, do you think that Crocs are the new mom jeans?
Exclusively at JCPenney.
Or are Crocs universally appealing?
That's a good question. I have zero expertise as some sort of, all I have is my personal lived experience expertise on comfort. I think it's more than a mom jean. I think it's sort of, I would say, because my husband wears Crocs and my children wear Crocs. And I think that that Crocs does these collaborations with Rick Owens, right? Like they do these high fashion ones. I think it's more people just being like, I can't keep up the facade anymore. Like I need to be comfortable, Yeah. And I think that that's not just a mom thing. I think moms need that. I think parents need that. I think grown ass people need that. I think even children need that. People who are like, it's a lot for me to figure out shoelaces, and I think it just kind of strips it down to just being comfortable and having things be a little bit easier.
Yes. Yes.
I'm here for the comfort movement.
Yeah. Mom jeans are coming back anyway. So they'll probably rebrand them as just like jeans.
Yeah.
But one of the other things that we have in common is that our work is both kind of asking people to confront these identities that they've taken on and kind of audit the results that they're getting from them. One of the reasons this book had me in a chokehold is because it was the first time that I had read about motherhood in a way that didn't remind me of the drudgery, the repetitiveness of the task, the sacrifice of it all. And I could really see sort of the creativity and the pleasure in crafting this subconscious for this little human. And I want to start.
That means a lot to me.
Yeah, no, it meant a lot to me. It completely changed the way that I show up as a parent. But I wanted to, for those that aren't familiar with your work, can you talk a little bit about how you define mothering in this context?
I define mothering, and I didn't do this. I'm totally borrowing here from scholars like Alexis Pauline Gumbs and China Martins and Maya Williams, who edited a book called Revolutionary Mothering, which I read when I had my first child, like soon after that. I think I maybe read it in 2015, 2016. Around that era. And then my friend Danny McLean wrote an amazing book called We Live for the We, The Political Power of Black Motherhood, which reminded me to go back to that. And so the way that they define mothering is not as a noun, right? Like motherhood and mother, they define it in action, the verb of mothering, which rings very true to me because, as you said, parenting and mothering lives in actions. It's every morning. Getting up, getting dressed, getting breakfast, right? And it's so many like repeated acts of attention to the body. And so they define it as anyone who's involved in nurturing and sustaining life. That's not the complete definition, but I loved that. And so the other thing that I love about that is, as someone who previously wrote a book about pregnancy and mothering, and who heard from people who were like, and the book was called Like a Mother. They were like, as someone who lives outside of, who is outside of the gender norm, like, or gender binary, like this book was really meaningful to me, but I think it's actually kind of essentialist, right? Like I don't identify as a mother. And I heard that, like as a woman of color, I'm thinking about how if my feminism isn't including other people and bringing people along the way that much of white feminism and second wave feminism excluded women of color. What am I doing? And so I wanted to also think about expanding that and also expanding it to be, we can all still have our personal definitions and we can hold on to like that specific meaning because it's a very strong identity for people. That's important, right? But it costs us nothing to expand it, to include more people. And then also when I think about our culture, the work of raising children is a collective endeavor. It is not like an individual choice that just comes down to parents, right? Like I think about how it involves, my mother is very involved in raising our children. Like my kids have aunties, right? They have beloved preschool teachers, babysitters, right? Like they've certainly benefited from the kindness of strangers, right? And like my friends who have zero interest in having kids, but who also like benefit from having a relationship with a young person. And so I wanted to use mothering as a way also to call everyone into this work and to see that we all benefit from it and we all are called to do it.
I think that's a perfect segue to my next question. I am a Black woman who has a degree of financial privilege, which means I have the means to spread my domestic labor and outsource it to many different places, both paid and unpaid. I've got my parents, I got his parents, I got Netflix, I got Amazon Prime, summer camp, daycare. I got everything, but like a lot of the business literature that you read that is directed towards women almost asks me to wear that as a badge of pride. They tell me that my ability to outsource my domestic work is the reason for doing all of this. And I feel conflicted because if you're not careful, it can feel like progress. But what it really is capitalism. It's my ability to pay for a solution.
Yes.
And so I wanted to tap on and allow other financially privileged women to feel a little pressure here.
Yeah.
What are some ways that women with financial privilege can use it to advocate for better solutions that affect all of us?
Yes, I love this question. I mean, I want to go back a little bit to when women really surged into the professional workforce, right? So this is like like 1950s, 1960s, right? This is like Betty Friedan, the feminine mystique, which was like women are not many women are not satisfied in just the home, right? Like they want more from their lives. And I think I'm on board with that. But Friedan's solution was really like, go find meaning in professional work. Leave the house, right? And lots of people really leaned into that. That's how we got lean in feminism. That's how we got the girl boss, right? Yeah. And the idea was great. It kind of turned toxic in like a predictably American way because it's cool. Like people can go out of the house to work. Domestic work never went away. Right. And so the idea was like that was only accessible to some people, mainly financially privileged and white people. And so someone still had to do the domestic labor. And that's when we bring in women of color.
I've drafted the Home Health Sanitation Initiative.
The what?
A bill that requires every white home to have a separate bathroom for the help.
Maybe we should just build you a bathroom outside, Haley.
To do this job for low wages and to remain invisible. Right. Yes. So that's, setting it up. So we're up against this thing that's been in motion, right, and celebrated really in America for a full 2 generations. And so now, I, like you, am someone who grew up I know so well, so intimately what it's like to feel othered, right? To feel like these systems are not meant for me. And I feel like I came late, not until my teens and 20s to a class understanding that I grew up with financial privilege, right? And that and I have much more financial privilege than my white husband, right? That was a lot for me to take on, right? But so now it's okay, great. So I'm here. And I wish for everyone the ability to share that labor, right? To share it paid and unpaid, right? Because this job can't be done alone, right? So I don't want anyone to feel shame or any type of way about needing help and taking advantage of, not taking advantage. We don't want to take advantage of our help, right? But we want to compensate that fairly. So there's a number of things, right? That I want to just say to people I see you who want to do better, but are also I don't know that I can afford to, even with my financial privilege, because the economic systems and the standards of the market and what we pay domestic workers and childcare workers, we didn't create that system. Right. So I want to name that, but it doesn't excuse us from trying to fix it. Right. So I think there's the federal piece, right, which is fighting for policies, which is also fighting for a domestic workers bill of rights, funding for in-home childcare. There's so many different ways to get involved. Right. And I think these fights are ongoing. Right. Just because we didn't get these things, there has been much progress made in the last people have been working on this for decades, right? But we were very close. The Biden administration ran on paid family leave.
Let's make sure working parents can afford to raise a family with sick days, paid family medical leave, affordable child care.
Right. And the Democratic, controlled Congress just kept bargaining that away and letting go of it. We were talking about 12 weeks of paid family leave at one point, and we saw it go down to 4, then 2, and then it just disappeared, right? But there are movements. The National Domestic Workers Alliance is a great one to join. Paid leave for all. These things are in motion. You don't have to do that much. You just need to send an email, make a call, and figure out how to be involved. So that's one level at which people could get involved. There's a great organization that I love that's called Hand in Hand. It's a domestic employers union and employers organization, and they work with both. So many of us who hire people to come and whether it's clean our homes or take care of our children, we don't necessarily see ourselves as employers, right? But we are. And our homes are work sites. And so just because the culture doesn't want us to formalize that doesn't mean that we can't or that we shouldn't. So Hand in Hand works with families, individual employers, and they get feedback and data, and they listen to the needs and the wants of domestic employers, domestic employees. And they work with people who want to do better. They have templates, so they have things in the state that I live in, Washington, and also in New York, but you should go to their website. They have template agreements that you can print out so that you can have a better relationship with your nanny or your house cleaner. They have guides to how to handle conversations around a bonus or time off, right? And so I think to really start to see this work as real work. And maybe you cannot offer health insurance and paid leave to your employee, but you might be able to learn more about their family. See if they have children that they might like to bring, right? Like once or twice a week. Like how can you meet them halfway? And how can you give this job respect and dignity through that formalization? So I think those are two great places to start. I also just think like talk to the people that you employ. Talk to these people who are like intimately familiar with your family, who care about you, like treat them as full people, like find out what their needs are and how you can create a better relationship that allows you both to benefit and thrive.
Beautiful. You just blew my mind.
As if it wasn't already hard, the pandemic pushed moms to the brink. By mid-2021, 1 in 3 considered leaving or changing careers due to burnout, and millions eventually did. This left us with fewer teachers, nurses, healthcare workers, and other critical roles that make our world work. It simply didn't make sense to go to work, so moms made the decision to stay at home. But that doesn't mean they aren't working. They simply aren't being paid for the work they're doing. So we wanted to know from Angela what she believed the implications were and what could be done to fix it. When we think about the phrase or term she-session, which is like not my favorite.
It's not my favorite.
It's
hard to produce with the tongue.
I also don't know if is it she-session or
it's a she-session.
She-session.
But we don't say re-session, so it doesn't work.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, I'm rooting for the cause, but I kind of need a remix on that word. Given what you do, what do you think we lose both culturally and financially when caregivers have to, or in many cases are forced to walk away or stay away from work? What's that risk here?
Yeah. I would say professional work, right? Because caregiving, it's really important to me to name that caregiving is work just because it is undervalued financially and like in our society. People are leaving professional work to do domestic work, right? And so I think I think that you're on board with that idea, but I also want to be really I want to name that from the beginning. So I want to go back to the beginning of the pandemic. Women's participation in the workforce, the professional workforce outside of the home, is directly tied to our appearance in public life and to our relationship to public life. And so I think before we even go into caregivers, the she session that was brought on by the pandemic, it first and foremost affected Black and brown women the most. When we first saw employment rates skyrocketing, that was in service industries, right? So that's restaurants, salons, and childcare centers. And many of those childcare centers closed and never to reopen, right? So there was this large number of Black and brown women who were forced out of the workforce, who found themselves unemployed. And so right then and there, we're removing the presence, seeing when we go outside Black and brown women, right? So that it starts there. And then it grew, right? The employment numbers grew. And then in the fall of 2020, when schools remained closed, 865,000 women were forced out of the workforce in 1 month, right? And that was because they couldn't do professional work and domestic work and also be online school monitors at the same time. And so, we lose so much. We lose things like research contributions, right? For me, I had a hard time writing. So you were losing my thoughts, my words, our creative energy, right? But you were also just losing our presence, our vitality, our resourcefulness, our beauty, right? There's all of these things that and I think what's really difficult to me about that is that our American society is already has a hard time accepting the fullness and the richness of women of color and our experiences and all women. And so we're losing all of the things that our culture needs desperately. I think about, policy, right? We don't have a family leave policy, a federal family leave policy. And we've never had, many other countries that are as quote unquote developed or as wealthy as us, we've never had a female in federal leadership. And it's not a coincidence that we've never had a robust family leave policy, right? Our laws are made by white men. And so what we need are actual policies that reflect the realities of caregivers and families in the United States. And I really worry how this, we're making gains back, but I think it was the beginning of 2020 there were still like 2 million less women in the professional workforce than there were at the start of 2020. So, it's going to take us a long time. Like we were already at a deficit, and I worry that we've lost that. I think our communities and our homes are benefiting from our expertise and our energy and all of the stuff that we're channeling into that. But, and that's good, I think, at a community level, but we need change on multiple levels.
You mentioned policies, and I can imagine if you're anything like us, you get asked like these really big questions, like how do we solve the problem, right? Like how do you solve the racial wealth gap? And it's like, do all the things, right?
Yeah.
While you're not a policy expert or researcher, you have sort of dabbled in that space. Is there low-hanging fruit from a policy perspective or from a workplace perspective? I know you mentioned paid family leave. Are the things that you've identified as really low-hanging fruit that just kind of seems like a no-brainer that would really make the lives of caregivers easier?
Yes. I love this. Thank you for sharing this with me. It's just, I think we get really caught up in complicated solutions. Right. Or like answers, or it's so complicated, but it comes down to very basic things. And these things to me are human rights, right? To be able to provide for your family, to be able to live, just even like a simple life, to have health, to have shelter. And it's the really most shameful part of the United States is we tie basic human rights to having a job. Right? Like this concept of earning a living is such bullshit. I just reject that. Like I am alive, right? It really gets to these narratives these long held beliefs we have around deservedness. Who deserves money? Who deserves health? Who deserves security? And obviously in America, that's very tied to race. Like we are on occupied stolen land. So we've already decided that Indigenous people do not deserve the land that they took care of for thousands of years, right? We built wealth on the backs of enslaved people, saying that they don't deserve to be paid for this labor, right? And so those narratives really run deep. And I think people have to believe that somehow they deserve something more than people of color, right? Like white people really hold on to that. And I think that some of that stuff is so deep seated that people don't even know that that's what they're operating under. But from a policy standpoint, I love that you asked this question because I am a huge believer in a guaranteed income. I am a big believer in a universal basic income. And it gets to this. I believe that the only real work of humans is care work. That is keeping yourself and your people healthy and alive. Nothing else matters, really. Yeah. Right? Like everything else we've just sort of invented as a job. Right? And so, and I really think like without care work, without someone feeding you, nurturing you, sheltering you, like holding you, you will never make it into adulthood. You'll never make it past infancy. Right. And I think this idea, like keeping yourself alive is really hard work. And just ask Black mothers that, right? Ask trans people that. It is much harder for some of us to keep ourselves alive than it is for other people, right? And so a guaranteed income, which we're like one of the richest countries on earth. We pour so much money into a military budget. Like money is there if we want it, right? Like we could tax the rich. We could tax corporations, right? We could have this money and give people a floor for just a simple, like dignified, basic life. And, data is in like people, I find it really insulting when people say things, like if we give people money, like they're not going to work. Like I am out here working every day of my life. Like even if I do not want to work, my children wake up, like they need things, right? Like this stuff is work. Like it is just so, but the truth is we have data now. on, there are pilot programs for guaranteed income going on across the country. There's an organization called Mayors for Guaranteed Income. Like, there are politicians who recognize this, right? Yeah. The data is in. Like, 60% of guaranteed income goes to groceries. Like, we can empower people to make choices that are best for them and their family, right? And also, it's like not up to, like, people can spend this money on most people spend this money on what they need, and they actually go and spend it in their community, and they spread it in their community. So to me, that is like, it's the most basic thing you could imagine. And, yes. And I think, like, it feels like a very, like, radical idea. Like, when I talk about it with some people, like, especially like, and not to generalize, but I've talked about it with some elders, and their eyes are like, and I think there's an idea that, like, a lot of Americans are tied to this idea. Well, it was hard for me. I want it to be easier for other people. Like, it doesn't have to be hard for everyone else. That to me is real progress, right? Is to make the world better and a little bit easier for other people, so they don't have to know that same sort of, like, humiliation and exhaustion.
Yes. Yeah. In chapter 9 of our book, we talk about the invaluable importance of community and how it's the key ingredient to achieving financial independence. Because when you have people you can share resources, experiences, and wisdom with, it makes the journey much easier to manage. The same is true for mothering. Hence the phrase, it takes a village.
But finding or building that village can be awkward. Honestly, children do a much better job at making friends than us adults do. So we asked Angela what her thoughts were on sharing the responsibility of mothering with others and how care work affects our careers.
But one of the things that I really appreciated about your book and what you talked about was kind of like your pandemic pod, which is one of the trends that I hope to continue as my new normal, where you just have this really tight support system. It's just like extra set of hands and eyes and household. But as I've tried to build it on my own, it's hard. It's awkward. It's a little messy. Like the other day, I just found out that our next door neighbor is 6.5 months pregnant. And we've lived next to each other for 3 years now. We're cordial. We say hello, we speak. But I realized that she was pregnant, and my immediate reaction was like, oh my gosh, we should exchange phone numbers, like, just in case you need something. And then I didn't say it because I felt bad about, like, I've never asked this girl for her phone number before. Like, I don't want to make it seem like I'm only friends with people who are, like, have kids. And so I didn't say it. And I'm struggling with the awkwardness of it all. And I kind of just want either external validation that that's completely normal and also the point of it, or advice for how to move past the hesitance of building new community connections with people.
Yeah, I mean, thanks for being so real with that. I mean, I relate to that so strongly, where I'm like, I don't want them to misinterpret this, right? But, like, that's already, what, 2 steps ahead, right? Like, you're thinking the other person's thoughts for them. Like, that never works out great for me. Ever. But yeah, no, it is the opposite of what we are conditioned to do, right? We're supposed to look out for number one, right? And so then people, like, when someone's generous towards us, sometimes we are like, and especially, I mean, as a person of color, I'm always like, excuse me, like, what are your intentions here, right? Like, I'm like, I don't know if I can just trust you, very well-meaning white woman who wants to, like, exchange numbers, right? Or, like, there's all those kinds of things, right? And I think, I don't know, one of the things, so I'm here, just first and foremost, I'm here to 100% validate you. That is totally normal. And the other thing I'd say is I ask myself this, and you don't have to do it all the time, right? Like, that's asking a lot of yourself. You know what I mean? Like, you can just do it sometimes. Like, you don't have to cultivate every single relationship, right? Like, sometimes I think about that. Like, and also some things just take time. Sometimes, like, you develop that relationship, but, like, it takes time. It's like, it's all very inefficient, which is the underlying thing. But sometimes the thing that I ask myself is, like, what's the worst case scenario if I do this, right? It's also a way that I manage my anxiety sometimes. Like, what is the worst case scenario here? If the worst thing that I'm worried about happens, what would happen? It would be that this person is, like, is this woman sus? And like, I don't want to give her my number, right? Like,
No, yeah.
right? Like that's kind of the worst. And it's really not that bad. And the best case scenario is that you are able to support each other. You know what I mean? And like, you get to bring her a meal when the baby comes, right? Or like hold the baby. And so I think about that. It's like, what am I afraid of? I'm afraid of like embarrassment. I'm afraid of seeming vulnerable, of like someone thinking something about me. And then if I sit with that, it's like, I could live with that. You know what I mean? Like it's like what lies on the other side of that fear, that hesitation could be really beautiful. You know, it could also be awkward and then flame out, but you know, that's just the risk of connecting and being a human being.
Makes for a good story.
Yeah.
Either way.
Yeah. Are you familiar with the term sandwich generation?
Yes.
Okay.
I'm the filling.
Or we?
Yes. Yeah.
It was one of I remember feeling that tension existed very early on in my career, and being a little frustrated that many of my peers weren't talking about it, because the way that so many of them internalized it was that, all right, this is part of the reason why I'm doubling and tripling down on my work. I need to grow faster. I need to earn more money. Right. I absolutely have to get that job, because I realized that there's like this ticking time bomb that it was a blind spot for them before. They didn't realize that their parents' retirement was underfunded. And now all of a sudden they found themselves in this really difficult position where they'd worked really hard to get to where they are. They've got the big job, they're earning the big money, but between taking care of themselves, taking care of their child or children, and now this sudden responsibility to take care of their parents, they could not enjoy the spoils of all of that work. And it just led to like this deep unfulfillment and frustration, and also intergenerational conflict. And then it spilled over into their marriage and all these things. Yeah. And so that's really was at the heart of why we really wanted to start talking more about money and doing what we do, which is what we call inspiring better conversations about money. Those that go beyond just the how-to, but those that look at and explore like some of the social, the cultural, and the systemic issues that actually impact our financial decisions. I'm sharing all of that. Yeah. Go ahead. That was not a question at all.
No, but if it's okay if I react to it. I mean, I love that. And I think that's such important work. Like hearing that specifically, like these people who were like motivated, you know, like to work hard, to get that job, to get that paycheck. And then I think about it as, what if, this is why I feel like the way we don't talk about care and we don't value it, it always comes home to roost, right? Like in this case, it's like the idea that they couldn't fully enjoy the spoils of their work because there's an idea of what that looks like, right? Whether it's a house, a car, or like, you know, golfing or whatever, right? But what if we saw that like part of the spoils, part of the pleasure is to be able to provide for the people who provided for us, right? For us to like, and I mean, that's asking people to reprioritize and to revalue things. And it's fundamentally, you know, it's destabilizing, right? And it's kind of like a radical reframe, but I think we are overdue for that. If not to like convince everyone, but to ask those questions. And so I admire and I'm grateful for the work that you are doing, because we should see that as like, the thing about care too, is it's like, you really have to believe in its importance, because you will not get validation from other people, from the outside world, right? And you have to, but I think that most people, if you ask them like, what's the most valuable thing in your life? They're going to name things that are, they're hard to have assign a financial value. They're going to talk about love. They're going to talk about connection. They're going to talk about being accepted and seen. And that's care, right? And to be able to provide that for someone and to receive that from someone is so beautiful, but we don't have a way of talking about it that like values it really in the same way that we talk about material things.
Angela's views on mothering are refreshing and expansive, to the point where it even includes her perspective on sex and intimacy. I mean, moms do have sex, right? And it's a parent's job to teach their children about their bodies and how they work, right? So why do so many of us still allow outdated views on what it means to be a mom get in the way of our pleasure or teaching our children important life lessons?
And why aren't we more honest about how a work-obsessed culture leaves such little energy for intimacy and connection with our partners. Anytime you sort of encounter some type of interesting thought, like a lot of it just boils back down to like this core belief that you have. And for us, it was really all about, as I'm reframing the work that we've done, is really inspiring people to imagine more of their lives outside of work, because work consumes so much of our identity and our time. So all these thoughts are going through my mind as I was like reading your book. But it also made me think about a part in our book where we talk about how work and our work identities got in the way of our intimacy, right? Like we had reached a point where we had just completely prioritized our career ambitions over our relationships and really over everything else. And so that was going to be part of my question was to say, like, to what extent do you think work and our work identities get in the way of our abilities to nurture the relationships that we have with our partners? I don't know.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. That's really, I don't know. I can tell that's coming from like a real place, and I just want to acknowledge that, and I appreciate you sharing.
Thank you.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's deeply, I think many people will identify with that feeling. Again, because like we rely on work for so much. But I mean, I think about, even to relate it to intimacy, and what I was like, one of the things I was trying to explore in that chapter was this idea of like, we have a script that we've been handed about sex and what intimacy is. And there's an end goal, and you put in some work, right? And you get to this like payoff. Like I have let go of this idea that when my husband and I are close, or when we're having like sex, right? Or what sex is, that it's, if the goal is just to make each other feel good and to feel close to one another, then sex can be like anything. Right. Exactly. Like, and I think that there's really something there of like, who gave us this script? Right. Like, and also it's a script that 100% centers male pleasure, you know, and like, and as a direct route to it. Right. And female pleasure is a little more circuitous, right? Like generally speaking. And so I think that like, so I think it's not even just like our particular work identities. It's our idea of, it's our veneration of work in American society as being like hard work is its own reward, right? Or like, or just like to be really efficient, right? Like, and to like meet the goal, no matter the cost, right? Like that just has a way of just, well, that just takes all the fun out of sex and intimacy to think about it that way. And it was very humbling when I realized, I was like, you're not putting in enough work, right? And I'm like, what? This is not the person I want to be in this moment with the person I love most, right? Like I want to be just like in this moment of pleasure with you and of caring for you and of sharing something, like, which is what brought us together. And so, I think the more we can do to shed that and to just show up as ourselves, which sometimes I don't even know exactly who that is. And it's really vulnerable and it's really scary, but it's much better. It's much better. Yeah. And I feel so much closer to my spouse in that way.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of Cashing Out, the podcast. To see more videos like this, please subscribe to our YouTube channel and be sure to turn on your notifications. To get your copy of Cashing Out the book, visit Amazon.com, Barnes & Noble, your local bookstore, or download the audiobook on Audible.